My name is Catherine Sedota. I work with Dr. Katya Noyes and my lovely partner here, Elizabeth Bangert, and we are part of the Core Competency Workshop Series. And what we're presenting today, or we're going to be leading today, I'm not leading, but I'm going to at least facilitate, is good clinical practice. And just so you know, there are a lot of core competency workshop series. And if you go to our Workforce Development CTSI website, you can find all of them listed. And these are some of the ones that are coming up. We have effective teaching running simultaneously, but on Thursdays with good clinical practice. And then we have responsible conduct of research and scientific communication. And we're most likely also going to be running a smaller group. This one's probably going to be in person, and it's all about quantitative skills. And if you notice, we have a lot of workshop series that run throughout the spring and the fall. And for instance, we just had a bird boot camp last semester, as well as translational teamwork, and good clinical practice is what this series is at this time. And we have actually 4 different workshops with good clinical practice, with Dr. Karalus going first. And if you attend all 4, you can get a certificate of completion, which I will send automatically upon receiving the data. I also want to tell you that there is a chance to get a micro-credential if you choose to do so. There is some work involved, but it's not actually too intense. Basically, you have to attend the entire workshop series, send me an email, and I will send you information about the good clinical practice micro-credential that can get you a digital badge that you can actually post on such things as LinkedIn or other electronic formats. It basically just includes an overview of how you would prepare for a research audit, and you're going to learn a lot about that today, along with having access to the slides if you need it. I'll post those later on in the actual workshop. An analysis of how you will be able to ensure good clinical practice during your daily operations, and that's going to run along with another workshop that is going to be presented in this series, 2 case study reviews and a reflection. So if you're interested in receiving the micro-credential/digital badge, please just email me and I can send you the information. We also have a workshop series survey that I'm going to be putting into the chat. Please complete that at your leisure. We definitely use these in order to improve the workshop series, and we need it also to report to our funding sources. And that's actually all I have at this time. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our wonderful presenter. Thank you.
Unfortunately, you'll have to look at all the items on the side, but I think you could do this one better. So just make sure.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm here to talk about the survival. And as daunting as that seems, I hope to make it a little bit less daunting. We all are going to undergo these if we're doing human subjects research, so get used to them, whether it's the FDA, the IRB, or a number of other different agencies, accrediting agency sponsors. Everybody's going to want to audit you if you're doing work. So we need to kind of get used to doing these and not get alarmed by them. So hopefully I can help you with that. So first thing is a disclosure. I don't have any financial or other conflicts of interest when I'm presenting this. I work for the university, so all set that way. So the reason why the FDA does the audits is to basically determine if your clinical studies are conducted in compliance with FDA regulations. It sounds pretty basic, but FDA regulations are quite complex. So we don't want to overlook them. The first rule, and this is probably the biggest rule, is if you have an audit, don't panic. It's not the end of the world. They're probably going to find issues with your study. Most of the time, they're going to be minor or ones that you can correct pretty easily. That's their job. I've actually spoken with a number of auditors, and they basically will tell you if they don't find anything wrong, their bosses are going to be coming and telling them they're not doing a job. So don't be afraid when they find things wrong. They will. We'll talk about how to address those and how to move forward and be successful. So the first thing is, if you're running a study, if you're the principal investigator on that study, you are in charge. You can't blame anybody else for shortcomings of the study. The overall conduct of the study is in your charge. Even if you designate other people to do roles, the responsibility of those roles getting done is still yours. You're also directly in charge of dispensing any test articles or drugs for the study. You have to make sure that the data collected for the study is collected properly and maintained in accordance with the protocol and any regulatory requirements. And the protocol is the key. Follow the protocol. We'll talk about that. You don't want to deviate from the protocol unless you have a very good reason. And also leading a team. Like I said, if you are delegating authority to other people, you are in charge of those people and you're responsible for the jobs that they are doing. And if they mess up, it's your responsibility as much as it is theirs. The FDA will not listen to blaming it on other people in your study. So the program that the FDA uses is called BIMO. It's the Bioresearch Monitoring Program. It's kind of a program within the FDA all by itself. So you may have your study going through different divisions in the FDA, but when the FDA wants to do an audit, they call the BIMO program and ask them to audit your study. So the objectives of the program are basically, first and foremost, obviously, to protect the rights and safety and welfare of any study subjects that are in your clinical trials. And also, very importantly, to verify the reliability and accuracy of your data that you're submitting to the FDA. If it's an FDA trial, you're most likely submitting to put a drug or device on the market. And in this day and age, there's a lot of people who are questioning science. So it's really important that the data that we're submitting to get approval is reliable and accurate as much as possible. If anybody finds any fault with it, they're just going to shoot holes in your data, and it really does science a disservice. So it's really important, and that's what they're looking for. And also to assess overall compliance with FDA regulations. And those are located, I have a bunch of references to FDA forms. If you are unfamiliar with how FDA audits work or what they're looking for, you can go to those forms and guidance and they will tell you. They'll be located throughout the PowerPoint, and I believe you are getting the PowerPoint, so you should have those forms, and in some cases, links to those forms. So what's their regulatory, their authority for inspection? Basically, it's the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, 704A. Upon presenting appropriate credentials and a written notice to the owner, operator, or agent in charge. So the FDA can come in and inspect you at any point, as long as it's at a reasonable time, within a reasonable limit, and in a reasonable manner. This includes the ability to inspect and copy any records related to your clinical trial. And more importantly is they use the word reasonable, but there we go. But they don't, sorry about that. They don't give you the definition of what is considered reasonable. So what's reasonable is whatever they consider to be reasonable. So again, usually what they'll do, I've been involved in a number of FDA audits because they come and audit our IRB, and they will give you a phone call, and it's always seems to be at the most inopportune time. And they will basically tell you when they're coming. When they tell you, they're not scheduling it with you. They're not going to negotiate, okay, I can't make it Tuesday. Can we make it next Thursday? No, they will basically give you a couple of days notice. And the only reason they do that is so that you can get your records together and make sure that you have all your key staff in place. I have the little Happy Thanksgiving banner there because the last time I was FDA audited, I got a call on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, or Wednesday at 3 o'clock, the day before Thanksgiving, and they told me that they were showing up the following Monday at our place to begin a full audit of our IRB. So happy Thanksgiving. That kind of left me with a little bit of indigestion, but that's what they consider reasonable. Like I said, 3 o'clock, day before Thanksgiving is when I got my notification that they were coming the following Monday. So they consider basically anything reasonable. So why do they conduct inspections, or when do they conduct inspections? Whenever they want to. Basically, the real answer is whenever they want to. Whenever they want to verify the accuracy or reliability of the data that they are giving for a study. They tend to come when certain clinical sites are terminated, if they're terminated for cause especially, or if they're just terminated and about to submit their data, they may want to come and just check and make sure that the data was collected properly and reliably. They also will come if a sponsor raises concerns. So if you're part of a large study that has a commercial sponsor, if your sponsor expresses concern to the FDA about one of their sites, the FDA may come and pay you a visit. Also, if they get a complaint from a subject or any complaint about a study site, it could be a whistleblower, could be anybody who lodges a complaint with the FDA that may cause them to come and do an audit. They also some of the divisions when you're submitting your data for submission. One of the divisions may want to come, especially if it's a product of interest. Like a lot of the COVID vaccines were kind of rushed through development and testing, and those received a lot of audits just because they want to make sure that when it's an agent of interest and it's an important agent, that it's kind of bulletproof when it gets approval. So if they're trying to rush it through, they want to make sure that nobody's taking any shortcuts. It's interesting because before COVID, or just as COVID was hitting, I actually had a physician come and tell me, okay, we're going to have lots of new studies coming on COVID based, and we need to get these through the IRB no matter what, and as quickly as possible. And sometimes we may have to take shortcuts. And I thought to myself, no, I don't have that same guidance from, the FDA or OHARP that I'm supposed to take shortcuts on when we make approvals for COVID drugs. And it was actually, like I said, quite the opposite. When you're getting something like a COVID vaccine through in a couple of years for a process that normally takes 10 or 15 years, they are going to take a special interest to make sure that everything is done properly and all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, because there's going to be a lot of questions from the public as to whether it was done properly. And they want to make sure that the documentation that it was properly done is there and that they can point to it. So how are inspections conducted? So basically, it's kind of interesting and a little bit of daunting at first. So basically, your FDA inspector will show up first thing in the morning, and they will come with FDA credentials, which is a badge. They also wear a uniform, or certain inspectors wear a uniform. They're part of the Navy. Don't ask me why they're part of the Navy, but they can come in with a full uniform. My first FDA audit was a woman who came in, scary looking woman who came in wearing a uniform and was flashing her badge, very official. I was terrified. I was only on the job for a year when she came in, and like I said, it was quite, it was quite intimidating. Basically, what they're going to want to do is they're going to want to interview a lot of different individuals from the program. So if you have a large site and it's got multiple people that are performing on the program, they're going to want to meet with each of those individuals, sometimes in private, sometimes as a group, but they're going to want to talk to the individuals. They're going to be asking the individuals what they do, how they do it, where they store things, and everything that interests them about the study. So that's pretty much how they are conducted. So do we have any questions?
Not at this time. I see nothing in the chat.
Okay.
Everyone, please feel free to ask a question if you have one.
Yes, if you have a question, please feel free to interrupt. I don't consider them interruptions. So okay, then we'll go on. So what will the FDA be looking for? They are going to be looking for a lot of different things. Who performed various parts of the protocol? Who did, especially informed consent. Informed consent is one of the big things. Also, data collection. How is data collected? How is it archived? Where is it stored? Things of that nature. They're also going to want to make sure that IRB approval for your study was given before you begin your study. I've had a number of people, thank God, no FDA studies, who begin their study just assuming the IRB is going to approve everything. That is actually serious noncompliance, and that is reportable to the government. So don't try and jump the gun until you have that IRB approval letter in your hand. Your consent forms, if you've worked with the IRB, they have a stamp, a date stamp on them. Make sure that date stamp is on them, and make sure the consent form that you're using has a valid set of date stamps. They're stamped for a year, so make sure you're using your current year's consent forms. They're going to look for all of that. They're also going to make sure that you're following your protocol. They're going to have your protocol in hand when they show up. and they want to see you following the protocol word for word. Protocols are not guidance documents. They are protocols. You follow them step by step. You do not deviate from your protocol unless you have a very good reason and justification, in most cases, for the safety of the subject. Otherwise, you do not deviate from protocols. That doesn't mean you can't change a protocol. You can submit to the IRB to change your protocol. If something's not working, you need additional data or something, you can definitely submit a modification to the IRB to change your protocol. But don't make that change again until you receive that letter stating that that modification to your protocol was approved. Until it's approved, you have to stick with the protocol as it was approved previously.
We do have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The question in chat says audits would include all facilities like clinics, labs, etc., listed in the protocol. Is this correct?
That is correct. Yes, they can go anywhere they so choose. So yes, if you have a number of different sites, in most cases, like if you were the lead site for 20 different sites, they're most likely they're just going to stick to your site. If they want to audit another site, they would probably make it a separate audit. But like if we were here in Buffalo, let's say, and you had your study was going on at several different Kaleida clinics, they may want to go and see the different clinics. So they are not shy about walking around or going to different locations to audit the different locations. That is part of their job. So does that answer the question?
I think so. And if she asks another question, I will just ask again. Thanks.
Okay, all right. And also data collection and recording. They're going to pay a lot of attention on data collection and recording. Again, the data is the key to getting your drug or device approved. They want to see that it is collected properly as you state in your protocol. So if you state in your protocol, handwritten notes will be, written into a database online. They're going to want to see both the database online and the handwritten notes. You say they're being stored in a file cabinet that's locked in room 201. They're going to want to go to room 201 and see them locked in 201. They're not going to want to see them locked in room 202. They're going to want to see them locked in room 201. So, and that's kind of that kind of leave yourself a little bit of flexibility when you're writing your study protocol. Don't, if you can't, have them all locked in room 201 because that's somebody's office and he's on vacation or whatever. Say it's going to be locked in a number of offices, and give those numbers or, a general area. And, the IRB can approve that. And then it gives you a little bit of flexibility. So when you write a protocol, don't write it too tightly that you can't follow it. And if you find out that you can't follow it, then you can submit a modification to widen it up. We see those all the time. So that's not something that the IRB doesn't see. Proper accountability of investigational products. That's one thing they're going to pay close attention to. If you have a drug, they're going to want to know where you store it. They're going to want to know how you give it out to your study subjects, how you get it back if they don't use it. Same thing goes with investigational products. That's very important. They're going to want to see all those records, basically accountability of where your investigational product is at any time, and it should all be documented. Documentation is the key. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Also, they're going to look into investigator disclosure. So if you're working with a company, say it's your company, there's no problem with running a study with your company. It's just you have to do a conflict of interest review. The IRB will do that for you. Actually, our conflict of interest office will do that for you. They will take a look at what conflicts that you have on your annual disclosure and make sure you disclose everything on your annual disclosure. Also, spouses and dependent children. You can't pass off a company and write it in your spouse's name and say you don't have a conflict. That will not fly. Conflicts are fine. In many cases, if you do have a company and you're doing a study, the IRB may disqualify you from certain parts of doing the study just because it's considered a conflict. That doesn't mean they expect that you are going to cheat the numbers or, not analyze properly. But it just, when somebody else is looking, an outsider is looking, they don't want to see the owner of the company also being the person who is analyzing the data and coming up with conclusions. They would rather see somebody who doesn't have an interest in the product doing items like that. And the IRB will guide you toward that. But the most important thing is making sure that on your disclosure, you have anything that may potentially conflict you with that study. If you have stock in the drug company, say you're working with Merck, if you have stock in Merck, make sure that is on your disclosure form. Some cases, if it's less than $5,000, it's considered not substantial and will take no action at all. But if it's over $5,000, they may put some limits on you and put what's called a conflict management plan in place. Like I said, no big deal. It's not that the IRB doesn't trust you. It's more for appearances so that outsiders can see that the person who is writing the conclusions or asking for approval is not the person who has a financial interest in the product. Also, the consent process. This is really important. They are going to want to make sure that the consent process is done properly. That's really important. I can't stress that enough. They're going to want to make sure that subjects are fully informed. That means going through the consent. So a consent process is not just handing somebody a consent form, here, read this and sign it if you agree. The consent form is only part of the consent process. You hand somebody the consent form, you have them read it, give them an opportunity to read it and comprehend it. So you can't just hand it to them if it's a 20-page consent form, have them read it, any questions, and sign it. Unless it was, say, an emergent situation where, say, somebody's having a stroke and it's imperative that you either get them in the study real quickly or they can't be. But if there's time to be spent, you may give them a week, you may give them 2 weeks. Here, take this home with you, read it. And if you're interested in the study, get back to me. Here's somebody who can answer you questions. You sit down with the person, ask them if they have any questions, if they understand everything in the consent form. And that's the point when you have them sign the consent form. The FDA reviewers are also going to look for things like coercion. Who's doing the consent? So, for example, if the physician who is running the study is also the physician of the subject, they're not going to want to see that person consenting the subject. A patient, is considered vulnerable to their physician. Everybody wants to, make their physician happy. They tell you to lose a few pounds and you say, yes, sir, even though you probably don't mean it. But nonetheless, you want to, please your doctor that you're doing what they're telling you. So if a doctor comes and asks you to be in a study, it's considered coercion because they kind of have power over you. You're afraid, oh, they won't treat me as well if I refuse to be in the study. So have somebody else do the consent. It could be even somebody in your office, a nurse, somebody who has no interest in the results of the study, but as part of the study, they can do the consent and explain it. You can still be available for questions, but you just can't do the consent process. Also, the information given to the subjects has to be understandable to the subjects. We recommend, I think it's a 7th grade level, so that people of all types can understand a consent form. You don't want to be using terminology that only other physicians will understand. Explain that. You can use the terminology, but you have to define it if you use it in the consent form. See that problem all the time. I go to all the IRB meetings, so when we review it, there are doctors, there are lay people, and all the time I see, they're using this term. Nobody's going to know what that term is aside from a doctor. They need to explain it. I see that probably every other IRB meeting. So use lay language when you're writing your consent form. Also want to make sure that the consent forms are signed and dated prior to enrolling in the study. The FDA does not want to see any piece of information, data, for a subject before the date of the consent form. That's one of the things they're going to pay attention to. They're going to look at the date that the consent form was signed. And as they go through the study documents for that subject, they're not going to want to see any study documents that have a date that's before they were enrolled properly. Also, another thing that I'll point out, you don't need to worry about this as much if you get IRB approval, but they want to make sure that the consent form has the 8 basic required elements from the FDA, and there are 6 additional ones depending upon the type of study. I'm not going to go through those just because if you use, most institutions will have a template consent form and it will include all of those elements of consent. So if you're using UB's template for consent, it will have all of those elements that you'll just basically need to fill out. It'll be kind of a question on on the form. What are the risks? What does the subject have to pay? What happens if I get injured? Things like that. Those are already on the consent form. You may need to add in your specific information for the study, but if you use the template, those will be in there. On the presentation, I do have those elements of consent here, both the required ones and the additional elements when they're appropriate. You can read through those. But again, like I said, those are all included already on UB's template for consent. So you don't have to worry about those as long as you're using our template. And the IRB, as they do their review, will make sure that they're present. So don't go using your own consent form. I actually just had to 2 weeks ago report somebody to the federal government because they decided to do research with their own consent form that was not of UB's template. And actually, that's how they were found out, because somebody recognized that they were trying to enroll people with a consent form that was not UB's template, and reported them to the IRB. So very important. All right. The FDA is also going to be looking at communications with between investigators and their people. They're going to want to see training documents if you're delegating authorities and things of that nature. Document any communications you have, any trainings, anything like that. They love documentation. Evaluations of progress in the investigation. They're going to want to see how you're doing in your study. How far are you towards recruiting the people that you said? What is the data looking like? They're going to want to see the progress in your study. Also, corrective actions. If you've had former findings, if the FDA or any other regulator or even your sponsor or monitors have found issues with your study, they're going to ask you for a corrective action plan. Corrective action plans are really important. You get to kind of, in most cases, write your own corrective action plan based on findings. But you need whoever did the inspection plan will approve your corrective action plan, and then you need to make sure that you carry it out to the T. In many cases, corrective action plans will have schedules. They will have dates that things are completed. They are going to want to see that those things got completed by the date that they said, and in the way that the corrective action plan was approved. Also, delegation. They're going to pay close attention again to delegation. If you're delegating different authority to different people, they're going to want to make sure that those people have proper supervision. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. So supervision, what are they focusing on? First of all, if you're delegating tasks to people, they're going to want to make sure that those people are properly qualified. If you're delegating taking blood from somebody, they're going to want to make sure that the person who you're delegating that is a phlebotomist. Did the study staff receive adequate training? That's very important. You need to train people who are on your study. Familiarize them with the study. Familiarize them with the goals of the study, what their role is, what you expect to see, and make sure that they have an understanding of the study. That's a two-way street again. You don't just hand them, what you want them to do and a sheet on the study. Again, this is should be a training session and should be documented. Have them sign up, have them even sign at the end. I usually do have people when it's really important, have them provide a signature at the end that says that they understood the training, not only attended it, but understood it and will follow the training. Good idea. FDA loves to see things like that. Once you train somebody, also, are you adequately supervising them? You may want to show up the first couple of times when they are participating on the study to make sure that they are doing it properly, and document that you've done that. Again, if it hasn't been documented, it hasn't been done. If you're using third parties, if you're using a clinic or something to do a task for your study, make sure that you have oversight of that clinic. Make sure they're doing it the way that you want them to do it. Provide training to them. Make sure that the data that you're getting from them is the way that you're supposed to get it in your protocol. Oversight is really important. The one thing that really bugs any auditor is I gave this task to this person, they didn't do it right, it's their fault. Nope, the FDA doesn't look at it. They say it's your fault. You did not adequately train them or supervise them or follow what they were doing. So don't try and get out of it by blaming somebody who you delegated an authority to. That's not going to work. All right. Additional things that they're going to look at are case report forms and supporting source documents. They may ask you for, if you have 100 subjects, they may say, okay, I want to see the data for for 10 subjects. Give me your list of subjects. They'll pick them at random and say, I want to see all the forms, case report forms, any supporting documents, anything on those 10 people. Consent forms, medical records, everything. They will want to see that. And they will go through it with a fine-tooth comb. When we had an FDA inspector, they did that for us for our IRB studies. He came in with a checklist, and he wanted to look at 10 of our studies that we approved. He had a checklist, and he went through that checklist for every study. And sometimes you're scrambling a little bit to get all that together, but when they're coming, be prepared to do that. I had people on my last FDA audit, which was a couple of months ago. We were there till I think it was 7:30 on a Friday in the summer to get our audit done. We passed with flying colors, thank God. But anyway, that is their dedication. Take these seriously. Other things they're going. Two other things that they're really going to pay attention to is deviations. You may have deviations in your study. You may say that this is a common deviation we see. I'm gonna, after the person is given the drug, we are gonna have them in within a 2-week window for a follow-up visit. Well, what happens if the person goes on vacation, or we have a blizzard or something that throws them off that 2-week window? That's a study deviation. You wrote it in that you're gonna have them within 2 weeks, and you deviated from the study. So deviations like that they're acceptable to some degree. If they happen once in a while, the FDA understands if somebody went on vacation, they understand blizzards and hurricanes and floods and things of that nature. But if it happens too often, you may need to change your window. You may need to say, okay, this 2-week window isn't working. We're not able to get study subjects in that 2-week window. Let's make it a 4-week window. So that's where I talked about, modifying your study to fit what works. You also obviously need to make sure that the data you're collecting for the study agrees with those deviations that you can make. But again, if you have a deviation, make sure you document it. Make sure you document the reason for it and any other important items. Is the data still going to be good that you're collecting during that time, or will you need to throw it out? And items like that. They're going to want to see everything, all the details they can on a deviation. Also, adverse events. If you have adverse events on your study, you need to make sure that you record those and what actions you took. In a lot of cases, adverse events may not even be a result of your study. Somebody runs across the street and breaks their leg coming to your study visit. Well, that's an adverse event. No, it's not related to your study, but it is an adverse event. It's something you need to track and record. They're going to want to see that. And the last thing is if you are using electronic records, there's an important aspect of FDA. It's called 21 CFR Part 11 requirements that are really stringent if you're using electronic records. In most cases, UB cannot meet the requirements of 21 CFR Part 11 requirements. So we can't have you do consent on electronic records here at UB for FDA studies because our systems do not meet those requirements. Those requirements are actually very daunting. It's not just, I have virus protection and firewalls on my computer. The requirements are that you have a program where you monitor your whole system. Any software that goes on your system is approved, has all the proper safeguards for maintaining electronic records. That's for both accuracy and for things like privacy and confidentiality. And that system also has to be tested regularly. It has to be, anytime you change hardware, add hardware, or subtract hardware, that has to be done properly as a process. So it's not as simple as just, okay, we have this 21 CFR Part 11 compliant software on my computer, therefore I'm good with 21 CFR. In most cases, if electronic records are to be kept at this point, it will be the sponsor's system that they will be kept on if they are 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. All right. So also So basically, like I said, what the FDA is looking for is GCP, good clinical practices. I'm sure probably most people have already taken the GCP course, so you kind of know the basics of what GCP is. And they're also going to follow another Form FDA 1572. I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the my presentation. And that is basically a contract between the investigator and the FDA. So to kind of summarize everything that the FDA is going to be looking at, basically what they're going to be looking at is a source of subjects. First, on your study, do your subjects exist? So if you're studying something and you say, okay, I'm studying Krabbe disease here in Buffalo, and I'm going to enroll 100 different subjects. They're going to look and say, wait a second, Krabbe disease is a pretty rare disease, do you have 100 subjects here in Buffalo? And you may say yes. Maybe Buffalo has a clinic for Krabbe disease, and you can easily identify 100 subjects, and they'll say, okay, that's good. But if you were just a random city and you were kind of going out into the public and asking for 100 subjects with Krabbe disease, they're probably going to say, you know what, that's not feasible. You're wasting people's time because you're saying you're going to collect the data for 100. You're never going to be able to collect the data for 100 subjects. Therefore, the few people who do enroll's time is going to be wasted. You're going to be putting them through a study, subjecting them to risk, and you're not going to be able to come up with any conclusions because you couldn't get 100 subjects in your study. So they're not going to look kindly on that. Also, they're going to look at the criteria for the people who you enroll. Do they actually have the disease that you're studying? The exclusion and inclusion criteria that you need to make sure that all of your subjects meet all of your exclusion or inclusion criteria. Those are you're going to submit to the IRB. You're going to submit a list of, how you include people, what's going to exclude people, and you better follow it. You may have a subject that is 90%, 98% meet your requirements, but there is one minor bit that they don't meet the inclusion or exclusion criteria. And there are many cases where I've seen people enroll them and say, okay, your blood count is off by, 1 point, and that's like, inconsequential, and I'm going to enroll you anyway. Nope, that's a no-no. If your inclusion or exclusion criteria states to a certain figure, +1 or -1 is not going to make the grade. They need to meet those inclusion exclusion criteria. Again, if your inclusion or exclusion criteria is too stringent and you decide you want to make a change, you can submit that to the IRB and make that change, as long as it's not going to affect your data that you're collecting for the approval of your drug or device. Again, IRB review obtained. Must stress that. Make sure that IRB, not only IRB review, but IRB approval. I should change that slide. Make sure that you have IRB approval. They're going to be looking for that. Consent obtained, again, very important. They're going to be looking at consent. They may even want to come in and witness a consent process if you have a subject available that you're consenting. They may ask to do that. Adherence to the protocol, again, very important. If your protocol says step by step, this is how you're going to do it, then that's how you're going to do it. Anything beyond that is considered a study deviation, and you better have a very good justification for deviating your study. If you have too many study deviations, even if you have good justification, well, then your protocol probably needed to be changed, so they won't look kindly on that. Also, if you have a number of study deviations, even if you can justify them. Verifying your primary efficacy measure. What you say, if you say, okay, we are considering, a drug or device to be effective if it meets this factor, then if it doesn't meet that factor, even if it's by, one small bitty point, then it did not meet your primary efficacy measure. So when you're putting together your efficacy measures, make sure that they meet the criteria that you want them to. If not, you might be able to change them, but the FDA is going to kind of be the driver on what they're going to consider efficacy to be. Again, adverse events, they're going to want to see that you've recorded all your adverse events in great detail. They're going to want to see more detail, the better. What happened, when it happened? Do you think it's related to the drug or device? Do you think it's unrelated to the drug or device? Are you not sure? They're going to want to see all of that information. Safety data. If you put in your study that you're going to collect safety data for study subjects, you're going to want to monitor them for white blood cells or EKG, or you're going to look at an MRI on a given point, then that data better be in your study. If you say you're going to take an MRI every 6 months, 6 months in one day is not acceptable. If you are going to say a certain level of WBCs is approved, is safe, one above is not safe. So make sure you have that safety data. Make sure it's collected when you say it's going to be collected. Make sure it's going to be collected how you say it's going to be collected. Again, if you find that your safety data isn't adequate, you need additional measures, by all means, add them. But again, don't start doing them until they get approved. And again, drug accountability or device accountability, very important. Keep records of every pill, every device that you have. Keep it in a binder, keep it locked up, and make sure if you have blinded studies, make sure that they are truly blinded. If they're double blinded, make sure they are double blinded. The FDA does not want to see breaking of any blinding unless it's absolutely necessary for safety purposes. All right, do we have any questions?
I actually have one.
Sure.
Have you ever had to do a corrective action? And if you did they actually come back in the FDA in order to review things, or do you get that to them a different way?
Oh, most certainly. They will almost always ask for monitoring and a status report. So yes, we've had to do corrective action plans. Almost everybody has to do a corrective action plan. Sometimes I'll go through it a little bit more. Sometimes it's a voluntary thing, and sometimes they will require it. But even when it comes to the FDA, even when it's voluntary, I don't know if I would consider it voluntary. If they're suggesting something, probably better to do it than to ignore it. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next sections.
That's excellent. So if somebody gets a corrective action, it's actually quite normal.
Oh yes, no, it's not the end of the world if they ask you for a corrective action plan. If they shut you down, that might be the end of the world for you. But having a corrective action plan is not at all unheard of. And as long as you put an adequate corrective action plan in place, they will accept it. So
Excellent.
right.
Thank you.
Like
Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Okay.
Oh, we have one. When you said UB is not compliant with EMR, does that include COLIDA?
No, that is not EMR. EMR is actually different from FDA CFR 11. CFR 11, Part 11, is an FDA requirement for FDA studies. And it's a quite daunting requirement. It was written back in the 90s and kind of almost is a lot of parts are almost not applicable, but we still need to live with it because they haven't made any changes to it. The EMR is maintained under a whole different set of regulations and is not part of CFR 11. So you can reach into the EMR to get data for an FDA study, but you can't store it outside of the EMR for the study without your system being CFR 11 compliant.
Right. Hopefully that answered the question. Okay. And she said, okay. Great. Thanks. I think we're ready to go on.
Yeah. And just as a note, UB is actually working towards having at least a small part of their system become CFR 11 part compliant. It's a huge undertaking. We've been trying it for, or we've been putting it in place for the last about 3 years. And it's like I said, it's not just having compliant software and compliant hardware. It's a whole program of compliance. All right. So, preparing for an inspection, the first thing is be prepared. So have documents ready for the inspector. When an inspector comes, they are going to want to see lots of documentation. You may not be able to get it all in one place, but know where it is. When they ask for it, know where it is so you can get it to them quickly. Like I said, my first bullet is kind of have it all in one place. If that's possible, you definitely want to have it all in one place, but many times that may not be possible. But know where it is so that when they say, I want to see X and X, okay, I'll have somebody run over to, room 102 where we have it locked up and bring it to you. Have that ready. If you have electronically stored documents, you may want to print those out or provide your auditor with on-site access. On-site access, providing them with access to a system is not always a great idea. So sometimes they might go surfing in other parts of the system. So beware if they want to access to your electronic system, try and limit that access to just the records that they are asking for, because if you give them, wide out access, they may start looking at other areas that you may not want them to see, or that may raise issues. So don't give blanket access to an auditor. Never do that unless it's absolutely necessary. Here's one that's really important. Do not make any after the fact changes or revisions to study documents. You bring one out and say, oh, I forgot to record this. Do not correct it after the fact. Leave it blank. It is better to, say that it was missed than to have an auditor come and say, you know what, I'm looking at the document and it was modified yesterday. Yet the date on it says it was collected 3 months ago. Why was it modified yesterday if it was dated 3 months ago? That will get you into a lot of issues. They will start digging deeper and deeper, and they will look for further into your documents. We'll probably find other ones that didn't have the adequate records, and they'll find ones that maybe you did after the fact, and that will get you into more trouble. Do not make after the fact changes. If if you're short on something, there's always the opportunity to provide a corrective action plan, but do not make changes after the fact. Any medical records they want, make sure you get them ordered for them so that they can see them. They may request those right off the bat. They may ask you, okay, provide me with a list of your subjects, and he'll give you 10 names and say, I want to see the medical records. Make sure that you have those if those are part of the study that you said that was in your protocol. All right. Also, as soon as you are alerted with a study, it's a really good idea to meet with your team and kind of discuss ground rules and how to deal with the audit. There's nothing worse than people not knowing what to do, or not knowing what to act, or acting, seemingly unprofessional or disorganized. Like I said, you need to maintain composure. I'll talk about that. So it's a good idea to get your study staff together. Okay, we have the FDA in here for an auditor and for an audit. And this is what we're going to do. Tell your people to be honest and truthful with the FDA. Like I said, they pick up real quickly when you're lying. They're good at, they've been on hundreds of audits. They know exactly when you're starting to try and pull the wool over their eyes. So don't do it. Answer the questions honestly and truthfully, even if the truth hurts. Like I said, unless your study is a total disaster, they're not going to shut you down. They may find some issues and may ask for a corrective action plan, but it's much better than if they have some serious concerns on your study, where they will suspend your study. That can lead into you not being included in future studies. It can lead into a lot of different issues that you just don't want to go down to. So be honest, answer their questions. You also want to dedicate people to the inspection. 1 or 2 people, yourself should be included. If you're the PI, you should be there to, every hour or so go and knock on their door and say, do you have everything you need? Is there anything you need? Excuse me. And have, somebody who can go there and get the data. So, when we had our IRB audit, I had 3 people in with me. I was the person who would go to the FDA person, do you need anything? And then I would go to my 3 helpers and say, okay, they need this and this and this, and go make copies of it and bring it back to me. And I would go and return with everything that they needed. There's nothing worse than delaying their inspection. They will stay longer. Again, like I said, I was there at 7, till 7:30 on a Friday, and if I wasn't there, he was staying through the weekend or coming back through the weekend, and he probably wasn't going to be happy to have to travel back on a Monday or stay his weekend here in Buffalo. So, they don't want to be delayed. They don't want to be at your site any longer than you want them at your site. So have people who are dedicated there, have the people who can provide them with the proper information on site. Another important thing is when an auditor comes, have a space dedicated for them. If you can find an empty office that you can give to them, that's great. Give them the office, provide them with a desk if they need internet access, help get them with internet access. Make sure the place is comfortable. Don't give them a broom closet. And more importantly, make sure that it's out of earshot. You're going to be scrambling for a lot of documents during a time of audit. That's normal. Don't, feel that you're, not doing a good job if you're scrambling looking for things, because as prepared as you can get, they will always ask for something that you didn't think they were going to need. And you just don't want them to hear you, if it's a little disorganized, it doesn't sound professional. It's better for them to be out of earshot. If anybody says anything you don't want them to hear, you don't want them within hearing distance of it. So that's kind of important. Also, document what you provide to the auditor when they have questions, or if they didn't get, if they have a finding and they didn't have the proper documentation. Well, you can say, oh, you know what? That's because you asked for these documents, and actually, what you were asking for was in this document, and you can provide it to them and clear it up. So, very important to document what you provide to your auditor, and also verify that those documents get returned. If they're looking for the actual case report forms, make sure you get all of those actual case report forms back, because if you get a new auditor coming 6 months down the road and all of a sudden you realize, oh, 3 of the subject's case report forms are missing, and I know I gave them to the auditor and he never returned them, you're guilty. Again, you're the PI, regardless of whether your FDA auditor or any other auditor walked away with them. You can't blame them for it. You are the PI. It was your responsibility to get those back. So make sure you document both what you give them and what you get back from them. Also, be proactive. There's a lot of guidance on IRB audits and investigations. Go and read those before they come and show up. I have some list of different guidance here that's available on the FDA website. You can go and find that. That kind of tells you what they're looking for, what they've, in many cases, what they've found, how they deal with audits, what types of questions they're gonna have, and what they're going to be looking for. In some cases, you may even find checklists that they're using for performing audits. If you have that in hand before they show up, then that gives you you're one step up on everybody else. Like I said, they're going to find stuff, but hopefully they'll find less stuff from you than they will on everybody else. And the best way to do that is to be prepared when they show up. There's nothing worse than when they leave and they have 10 findings, and all of a sudden you sit back in your chair and look at what they were looking for and realize, oh no, I could have avoided 5 of those findings or 8 of those findings because we had that information, over here or over there, and we just couldn't find it or forgot about it or whatever reason. There's nothing worse than that. So be prepared for what they're looking for. And if you have an idea of what they're looking for, you can avoid that situation. All right, so again, I talked a little bit about this, but if you're delegating authority, they're going to want to see things like job descriptions. If you're delegating authority to a phlebotomist, they're going to want to see that the phlebotomist is really a phlebotomist and not just a guy in your lab who's good at taking blood or a former phlebotomist. They want to know that everybody who's given a task is qualified for that task. Also, that they've been trained for it. If you're training your staff, put together an outline of what you're going to train them on, what you're going to talk about the study. I'm going to give a summary of the study. I'm going to give a summary of the procedures used in the study. I'm going to describe how those procedures are done. I'm going to, follow you and watch you do X and X number of those. And they're going to want to see documentation of that. They're going to want to see a training records, basically a sign-in sheet where people sign and that they were at the training. That's very important. They're going to want to see signed training records. Licenses. If somebody needs the license as a phlebotomist or as a pharmacist, they're going to want to see that those people have their licenses. And CV and resume, obviously, are good to have. So have that all in your study file. If you're delegating authority, it's very easy. It's much more difficult if you have to go and chase somebody down. Can you send me your CV or your resume? And the person says, oops, I haven't updated that in 10 years. Have that on hand before they show up so that you and they aren't scrambling to get things like that together. It makes it a whole lot easier for the basic stuff. And it also gives a lot of confidence in the FDA auditor that you're doing things right. They love to see documentation on everything. No matter how simple or no matter how complex. More complex is better. But even, like I said, having a attendance form with people sign their signed names and the date and a title of what the training was, and attach your training plans to that, and you're good. You've accomplished your training. Again, PI supervision and oversight. Once the training ends, that doesn't mean everybody goes off and does their thing. Make sure you come and supervise them. And like I said, document that. Okay, on day on March 3rd, I went and watched, Jane Doe go and draw blood from subjects and made sure that it was put in the proper, proper vacutainers and things like that. They're going to want to see things like that and do it from time to time. You don't just do it once or twice and then forget about it for the rest of the study. Do it over time. Have proper oversight. Come and visit all through the study to make sure things are done properly from start to beginning. People tend to get complacent. They tend to skip steps over time when they see they may not be needed. Again, if you have your procedures, your SOPs, standard operating procedures, you need to follow those to the letter. Even if you realize one step might not matter in your study, don't skip it, follow it. Like I said, if it truly is unnecessary, you can make a change to your study and get rid of it. But until that change gets approved, follow that SOP to the T. They are going to pay close attention to that. Like I said, it's important when they're looking at the data that they know the data was collected exactly as you said it was collected, and that it's a reliable data. That's really important, especially in this day and age with people questioning the way science is done. Here is just another guidance document. I'm not going to go through this, but this is kind of a link to what the FDA is looking for in their inspection. So, if you have some spare time, peruse through this. This is actually guidance for FDA staff. So it tells you kind of their frame of mind when they're coming in and doing an audit. So, like I said, being proactive might be something you might want to just take a look at, or at least have on hand. If you have a few seconds, read a section here and there, and you kind of get in the mindset of what FDA staff are looking for when they come for audits. Here is Form FDA 1572. This is a really important form that a lot of people just kind of go to the end of it and sign it. I don't know how many times I see that. I've worked as both an investigator and in compliance, so I've seen it. I remember going to my chair and saying, could you sign my IACUC protocol? And they're supposed to, review it and go through it and make sure that it's, that it's good protocol, kind of do a scientific review of it. No, they turn to the back page, sign it, and hand it right back to you, and you go and submit it. That makes you real happy because it took you only a few minutes, but that's not the proper way to do it. And I've seen so many people kind of treat the Form FDA 1572 like that. This is an FDA form, so they just want a signature and date at the end. But if you look closely, read this. This is not just something you sign. This is your contract with the FDA. The FDA considers this a contract as if you signed a contract for a mortgage or for anything else. If you look, everything in it is, I agree to, I agree to, I agree to, I will ensure that. They take each one of those very seriously when they are doing an audit. If you violate any one of those, you have violated your contract with the FDA, and they take that very seriously. So when you're signing this document, make sure you read it and make sure you follow it, because that is their way of making sure that you are working properly with the FDA. And they will disqualify you from working with the FDA if you do not follow your Form FDA 1572. So take it very seriously, read through it, make sure you understand it before you sign it, and by all means, make sure that you follow it. All right, here's another one. This is the FDA Regulatory Procedures Manual. This says, this is again written for the FDA, but again, if you read through the sections, and I have some of the sections highlighted that you might want to pay attention to, you can kind of get in the mindset of an FDA auditor. This is kind of describes what they're looking for when they go on an audit, and how, what they want to see that makes you compliant. Another way of being proactive is conduct a mock inspection. Don't tell your staff that you are conducting a mock inspection, because they will act totally different if they think it's a mock inspection. There are a lot of different ways you can do mock inspections. You can contact somebody from your department. You could contact the IRB. You could contact just about any outsiders. You could have your sponsor do it. But it's not a bad idea, because the more inspections you have, believe it or not, the less excited you become. The easier they are for you. You get used to what they're looking for. You get used to doing how to react when things may not be going as well as you hope for in the inspection. And it will definitely help you to get you and your team to get through inspections. It will also point out areas where you might be not compliant. If you conduct a mock inspection and find, oh, darn it, we're not doing this step, you could do it. You could write a corrective action plan on the spot. You don't even have to submit it to the FDA because it wasn't an FDA audit. And then when the FDA comes in, and if they look at your early documents and find, oh, you weren't doing it right, you can say, you know what, we did a mock inspection and we prepared a corrective action plan. Here it is. We followed it. And if you see everything past this date is going to be compliant, they're going to be impressed by seeing things like that, because now they're not the lone inspector of your site. They're going to know that you take compliance very seriously, because not a lot of people do that. So not a bad idea. All right. Do we have any questions?
I don't see any in the chats,
All right.
and we only have approximately 28 minutes remaining.
Okay. This is kind of the last section I'm going to talk about. So do's and don'ts of an investigation. So this is kind of more on the ground. You know, when the inspector shows up, how do I act? What do I tell them? How do I do that, and everything like that. So first we'll go through for the do's. First of all, give the perception that you are in control. Everybody is nervous when they show up, when they come in their uniform with their badge. Like I said, the first time I was like, my mouth was probably hanging open, but I didn't let any of that show. You want to give a perception of confidence, you know, and you should have a perception of confidence. If your study is written right, if you've done it right, if you are doing it right, then you should be confident that you're doing it right. Like I said, will they find things that are wrong with it? That's their job. They will find things that are wrong with your study. You may think you have the most perfect study, but they're going to find things wrong, because again, if they don't, their bosses are going to be asking, are you truly doing a good job? Because we don't see many sites that come in with no findings at all. So expect them that they're going to find things. In many cases, it's going to be minor things. If you're running a good study, that's most likely what it's going to be. But that first impression is critical. You know, if they show up at the door, you welcome them. You know, I have all the documents ready for you. I prepared an office for you. If you need anything, you know, I'm here for you. I also have my administrator or whomever here to help you. Here's a phone number for you to call. If you have IT issues, you know, let me know. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. And we're here to provide whatever you need. And, you know, that gives a really good first impression. You know, you don't want to be, look like you're flustered. You don't want to be mean to them or treat them badly, because that's all going to show when it comes to them doing an audit. Also want to identify your context experts early, so that they're prepared. So as soon as you get that call from them that there's an FDA audit, you want to be calling all the key personnel in your study and telling them, you know what, I need you to be available for this inspection. You drop everything you have. I may or may not need you, but I want you to be there. You know, study up on everything that you do. Know where your documentation is. Be prepared if they bring you in. And, you know, talk about, you know, being confident, answering truthfully, and how to act around the inspector. That will help your audit tremendously. Again, always tell the truth, never give false data. You want to demonstrate early on that you're trustworthy, truthful, and that you're showing respect to them. If you're lying to them, then they consider that you have no respect for them. They're just going to dig deeper. That's their job. When they see a week apart, they're going to look into it. So don't try and hide anything. Don't once you give false data to them, they are going to dig so deep, and they will find a lot of fault with you. So don't do it. Whenever possible, also speak to your SOPs. You know, if they're asking you about how something is done, then you can get your SOP out. Say, we follow our SOP. Here it is. You know, I'm going to get it out because when we follow it, we have it out, and this is how we do things. And speak to the SOP, directly to the steps of the SOP. There's no reason not to do that. Don't guess what your procedures are. Have them in front of you and reference it as you go along. That way, you're not missing any steps by guessing, because you may say, oh, you know what, we use the SOP when we do this. I missed that step because I didn't have it in front of me. You don't want to do that, because an inspector will say, well, how do I know you have that SOP in front of you if you didn't have it in front of me and I'm an auditor? You know, I'm not trusting that you have it in front of you when you're studying. So, like I said, speak to your documents whenever possible and have them in hand. And it's also okay to say, I don't know. If you don't have information with you they're asking a question and you have the information somewhere, it's in your files, or somebody else has that information. It's okay to say, you know what, I don't have that information with me, but I'm going to get it for you. I'm going to go and get it. It's in this file, or you know what, my study personnel would have that information. I'm going to call them and bring them to address that. So it's okay to do that. Don't try and fill the void, and try and know it all when you don't, because you can't be expected to know everything that goes on in your study, right down to the minute detail. So if you don't know it, don't try and guess at it. Don't try and falsify it. Tell them you don't know, but you will get it for them, and then promptly get it for them as quickly as you can. And it's also okay to sit in silence. So many times, people, you get uncomfortable. You're sitting in the inspector's office, and you'll be answering questions, and all of a sudden he's going to sit down there and be quiet, and he may look like he's thinking. He may be at his computer. He may be doing things that will make you uncomfortable. And think about this happens often. You will want to have small talk. You may want to fill the void. You may want to add additional information to the question that he just asked. Don't fight that. Don't do that. That's actually an old business trick. I used to work for a company, and that's one of the things that we learned. I had a quick business class, and it's known as the golden moment of silence. If you are silent after you ask a question, most people will start to volunteer additional information that you haven't asked for. And try it someday. Just, when you have somebody in your office and you ask them a question, just sit there in silence. It'll be uncomfortable, and they will start to talk. Don't do that. The FDA people know that trick too, and they will do that. They're not if you answer the question, but they're not totally confident that you answered it correctly, they may sit there in silence, and you may volunteer something that you didn't want to volunteer just to try and satisfy them. So be aware of that trick. They use that. I use that trick too. So don't fall for it. And be courteous and maintain a positive attitude. Like I said, don't be nasty to them. Be courteous with them and stay confident throughout it. Even if you don't feel confident underneath, maintain a positive attitude. You will get through it. You will do okay. It's not going to last forever. If they ask a question that's overbroad, don't be afraid to narrow it. If they're asking the whole question and say, that's just too broad to answer, I'm going to answer it very specifically. Restate it, narrow it, and say this is the answer to it. They may want to go further than it, but like I said, keep it narrow. Don't get caught on broad questions where you can't provide an accurate answer. Also, sometimes inspectors will misunderstand things, reading somebody else's protocol or reading documentation. Sometimes it's kind of like, even in the IRB, I have IRB reviewers and we have investigators, and sometimes it's as if they speak different languages. We're used to reviewing protocols, and scientists are used to doing it. I was a scientist formerly, so I kind of speak both languages, and I see it happen all the time where an investigator is trying to tell the IRB something. The IRB is not understanding it because it's not phrased properly or something, and I'll come in and say, oh, you know what, he really is doing it right. He's doing it this way. And investigator says, yeah, that's what I wanted to know. And the IRB says, yeah, that's what I wanted to know also. And it's very easy to clear up. So if you think they're misunderstanding something, don't be afraid to, interrupt them and say, I think you're misunderstanding it, and provide them with the information that they need, because inspectors aren't perfect as well. And here, really important, you're going to have a closeout session at the end of your audit. Make sure that you have lots of people there. High level people, if you have them, they should be present there. That stresses that you're taking this audit seriously. You want all your people to hear the findings so that everybody can address those findings. If you can't find high level people, even find study personnel, but you don't want to be the only one sitting in the room if you've got a team of 20 investigators on your study listening, because they're going to say, you know what, you don't even take this very seriously. You're the only person, you're only here out of the courtesy for me, and why should I take my time to be courteous with you? So when they have the closeout session, bring as many people from the study as you can into that closeout session to listen to what the auditor has to say. And you can also ask questions at your closeout study. Sometimes you can clarify things. I've had an auditor cross off one of their findings at a closeout session because he had a finding, and I said, no, we showed you this, and I brought the documentation in there, and he crossed it right off the list, and it wasn't a finding. So it saved me part of a corrective action plan. So all right. Always, you can ask your inspectors if they see anything that's concerning. It's a two-way street. Inspectors have seen a lot. They've seen a lot of different studies, and in some cases, they'll actually provide you with advice. You can ask them for advice. If you look like if it looks like they're looking at something and have some concerns, you can ask them. Do you see something that concerns you? And if they do, ask them. Well, if you're not sure on how to fix it, ask them. Well, what kind of a solution are you looking for? What would you recommend? Sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they'll say, well, we can't make recommendations. I've had inspectors do that, but I've had other inspectors who will open up and say, I've seen, in Penn State, they have a study like this and they do it this way. You might want to consider doing it that way. And like I said, that also shows that you show an interest that this audit is done right and that your study is being done right. One thing that's really important, if you've had previous audits, whether they be by the sponsor or your review board or whoever, and they've asked for you to make a corrective action plan or make changes for issues that they found, those are going to be documented. Make sure that you made those changes to resolve the issue. The auditors are always going to look for that. They're going to ask if your DSMB has had any findings, what those findings were, and they're going to want to make sure that you addressed those findings. If your sponsor had an audit, same thing. I want to see a report of your sponsor audit, and they're going to look, and if they have any findings, they're going to say, how'd you address them? And you better have documentation and show that you addressed those and you did them in a timely fashion. If anything wasn't completed, you better have very good justification as to why it wasn't completed. Maybe one of their findings was something that you only do, once every 6 months, and the FDA auditor showed up in 5 months, and you could say, well, we haven't completed that because we only do that every 6 months, and it's going to be completed next month. But make sure that you have justification for items that you haven't completed. And if you do have items that need to be resolved, resolve them quickly and effectively according to your corrective action plan. Whether it's an FDA audit or whether it was a sponsor audit or any other auditor finding, make sure that you address those promptly and document those. So don'ts in an audit. Never argue with the inspector. Kind of consider the inspector always right. They may be misinformed. They may not have gotten all the information properly, and that you can discuss with them. Make it a two-way discussion. If they got it wrong, you can say, well, no, we are doing it right, and show the documentation that you're doing it right or whatever they may have missed. And like I said, they get things wrong too, and they're not at all against crossing something off of your off of a finding if you have the if you have the findings. If you argue with them, it leads to, they may have other things wrong that, maybe I might want to look a little bit deeper into this because they're not taking me seriously. Again, I'll stress it again, the golden moment of silence. Don't offer additional information. When they ask a question, answer that question with the information that they need and stop there. Don't start offering additional information unless they ask for it. You can only get yourself into trouble. Also, don't look nervous or agitated. This is something that's very difficult. For some people, it's almost impossible, but work on it. Have a look of self-confidence, smile, be very courteous with them, but you don't want to look nervous or agitated like you have something to hide because that's just incentive for them to look deeper. Another important thing is don't interrupt when someone else is talking. And that can be your study staff or the inspector. If the inspector is stating something, if he's wrong, let him finish up. Then that's the time when you can talk to it. If the inspector is asking your staff how something is done or where something is, let the staff answer the question. If they're answering it wrong, the worst thing you can do is in the middle is interrupt them and prompt them. No, you do it actually this way. Because all of a sudden the inspector, they're thinking, I'm not asking the PI. If I wanted to ask the PI, I'd ask the PI. I'm asking the staff. I want to see what the staff has to say. At the end of it, you could prompt the staff, after the staff is done speaking and say, I thought you did it this way. And then the staff may say, oh, you're right. Or no, we've always done it this way, but go with what the staff has to say. Do not interrupt them. Do not try and correct them, because that's a red flag to an auditor when you're trying to correct somebody else and interrupting them while you're speaking. It's almost as if you're trying to prevent them from saying something that you don't want an auditor to hear. So don't do it. Again, documentation, documentation, documentation. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. I often tell people, I'm like, you can be 99% do everything properly, 100% properly, or you can do things 99% wrong, but have it all or 99% right, have the 1% wrong, and you have it documented. The person who had it 99% right and document it is better off than the person who did it 100% properly but has no documentation that they did it that way. Documentation means everything. Write everything down, good, bad. If it's bad, how you're going to address it, and go from there. The FDA loves to see documentation, good, detailed documentation. That gives them confidence that you're doing the study properly. And if you're not, it tells them why you might not be doing it properly, and they'll work with you on it. If you don't have documentation, then it means you didn't do it, regardless of whether you did it right or wrong. If it's not documented, they would consider it not done at all, and that's worse than doing it wrong. And like I said, again, I'll say don't guess. It's okay to say I don't know to an auditor. It's okay to go and get information that you don't know the answers to, or to call somebody in the room who has the answers that you don't. If you start guessing, you're just going to dig yourself a hole. And when they realize it, you may dig yourself a deeper hole. And those are red flags for an auditor to go digging deeper. So get accurate information. And again, like I said, it's okay to say I don't know, or I don't have that information with me. I'll have to get it. Also, don't ever say off the record, people do it this way or off the record. When an auditor comes in, nothing is off the record. This is not like television shows or the press, where you can say off the record, this is the way we do it. Nope. If you say it, everything is on the record. Don't start telling them things that you don't want them to hear by saying it's off the record. Another important thing is don't overwhelm the inspector. A lot of people will try and overwhelm the inspector. Oh, I'm going to give them the view that, we are really well prepared. I am going to have people, and they are going to not only talk about what they do, but they're going to talk 10 times over what they do and give 10 times the amount of details. And I'm going to have a stack of documents. I'm going to give every document we have in the study and put it on their desk. An auditor is not impressed with that. And in opposition, they're going to look at it as you're trying to hide something, because you're trying to provide me with so much items that are right and properly done, that I'm sure if I dig a little deeper, I'm going to find things that are not done properly. Or, you're giving me so many documents that I'm not going to be able to find what I'm looking for, because you suspect it's done wrong, and you're just trying to hide it amongst this ream of documents that I didn't ask for. So just provide them what they ask for. Don't try and overwhelm them. They're not going to fall for that. And also don't display deceptive behaviors. Again, you don't want to appear overly anxious. You're going to feel overly anxious. You're going to want to get them out of there as quickly as possible. But again, appear calm, appear confident. That goes a whole long way. Also, don't be uncooperative or defensive. If they have findings, listen to their findings. Ask them for, how you can address those findings, or even better, suggest how you're going to address those findings. And they may, tell you, yes, that's how you're going to do it, or no, you know what, that won't meet the needs. But again, it's a two-way street. And if they have a finding, then suggest how you're going to fix it right there. And they will, they may kind of give you pre-approval of what you're going to write in your corrective action plan. Don't want to be guarded or evasive. You don't want to be unhelpful by any means. Like I said, if anything, if they're auditing, I used to make it a policy to go once an hour and go and ask them, do you need anything? Can I help you with anything? Is there any difficulty? Do you have anything I should know? And talk with them. It goes a long way. Again, if they have findings, don't be apologetic and accepting, oh yeah, we've been doing it wrong for that long. We should have been doing it right. I apologize. No, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear, I didn't realize we were doing it wrong. Or you know what, how about if we did it this way? Would this be better? Or we'll address it this way. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear active, action, how you're going to address things. They don't want apologies. Apologies don't mean anything to them. They want to hear action plans. Insincerity, obviously, insincerity. If you are insincere, as soon as they realize that they're going to dig deeper. Another thing I hear all the time is rationalizing it. Everyone else does it that way. We know that at Penn State they're doing this study and they're doing it that way. First of all, don't throw your colleagues under the bus. They're not going to appreciate that. Second of all is whenever I look into that, I get that all the time in the IRB, and this study group is doing it that way. Why can't I? Well, then I go and look at that study group. Well, you know what? They're doing something that's totally different than what this this investigator is doing, and it's not applicable. Inspectors don't buy that everyone else is doing it, so I can do it too. Again, they're just going by the findings, and that's it. So, all right. So findings. I'll go through this quickly. I know we're getting towards the
Yeah, thank you.
big negative implications are they can do a site shutdown. They can disqualify a PI from future FDA studies. You can get bad publicity, legal issues. How are findings communicated? So the way that FDA gives their findings is by a Form FDA 483. And many people consider this like a disaster. If I get an FDA Form 483, this is a disaster. No, it's not. I've gotten one. It's asking you for a corrective action plan, and you put the corrective action plan in place and make sure you follow that corrective action plan, because they will follow up. If not in the immediate future, they will follow up at the next audit, and they're going to have your corrective action plan in place and want to see that it was followed. So FDA 483 is the form that they're going to issue you. It's basically a form letter, and they're going to give you the opportunity to respond to it. You don't have to respond to it. You can respond orally to it, but don't make the mistake. Even though it's a voluntary, you want to write a written response to your Form 483, and you want to detail your corrective action plan. Your corrective action plan should have a number of things. It should state why you weren't doing whatever you were doing, how you're going to fix it, and how you are going to, when you are going to have it fixed by, and how long you're going to monitor it to make sure that it is corrected. And don't draw out a corrective action plan. You want to be very proactive and get that done as quickly as possible. Don't put it over a year. Don't put it over 6 months. A month, 2, 3. 3 months with monitoring should be as quickly as possible. Because again, when they inspect you again, and they will come again if you have a corrective action plan, they're going to have it in hand. They're going to want to see it's followed to the T and the schedule was met. When you do write your response, they're going to have your district office. You're not going to be responding to your auditor. You're actually responding to your district office. So your district office asks the BMO to do the inspection. And when they write a 483, you write your response back to the district office, not to the BMO. The BMO is the auditor. He's not going to see your response. The FDA district office is going to read your 483, and you're going to want them to see your corrective action plan. So make sure you address it to the district office. That'll be listed on your 483 plan. And I have a frequently asked questions on how to address FDA 483s. So common observations that they may find is failure to follow the signed investigator statement. Again, that's the 1572 form. If you're not following it, they may cite you on that. Protocol deviations. Again, did you document them? Did you report them? Did you deal with protocol deviations? Make sure that you have those documented well and have dealt with recurring ones. Inadequate record keeping. If you have forms in your study protocol that you say you're going to fill out to completion, then those better be filled out. Those better be the ones that are used. Where you store it and everything of that nature is all included in record keeping. Make sure it's done according to the protocol. Inadequate accountability for investigational product. If you can't account for drugs, pills, investigational investigational devices, they are going to flag you on that. And of course, inadequate subject protection, making sure that the consent process was done properly, making sure that safety of the subjects is first and foremost on your study. So points to consider when responding, like I said, take the 483s seriously, accept the responsibility. If it's a finding and it's a good finding, then you need to accept the responsibility. Explain to them why it took place and how you're going to fix it. If their 483 is inaccurate, then you need to explain why and provide documentation on why it's inaccurate to support your explanation. And you want to, like I said, indicate that you have a clear understanding of what their finding was, why it's important, what the cause of it was, and how you're going to address it. So take the 483s very seriously.
We have 3 minutes remaining.
Okay. I talked about the corrective action plan, so I won't go through with that. Like I said, you can feel free to contact your FDA for clarification questions and suggestions. Like I said, it's a two-way street, and sometimes they will be able to help you with it. Right. So things that are not persuasive, not sending a response. You didn't take my audit seriously, so I'm going to come down extra hard on you. Vague or general responses. They don't want to see vague responses. They want to see detailed responses to violations. Blaming third parties. Again, you're the PI. You're responsible for all parties, third parties, people under you, anybody who's in your study, you're responsible for. Again, asserting that another regulatory authority had different findings. Well, before the FDA, I had my IRB come in and they had no findings and said this was acceptable. Again, not acceptable to the FDA. Different regulatory authorities have different things that they look at. So don't say that it was okay here, so it must be okay here. Referencing audit certificates of another sponsor. You don't want to do that. Oh, I got a clean audit from this study. We did the exact same thing. That's not going to fly either. Absence or loss of records, not tolerated either. They don't want to hear excuses. They just want to see the records. All right. So after the inspection, after the 483 is prepared, you're also going to get an EIR. The EIR is the Establishment Inspection Report. That's what comes from your division. It's a response to the 483, and it also takes into account your response that you sent in response to the 483. And again, everything that you put together and everything that the FDA puts together is disclosable under the Freedom of Information Act. So when they issue a 483, the public can see your 483. When they issue an EIR, the public can see your EIR. And I'll have some of the links that following where you can go and look at 483s and EIRs. All right, so these are kind of the general descriptions of what they're going to find. No action indicated. That's pretty rare. Usually they're going to at least ask for voluntary actions. Voluntary action indicated. When the FDA comes up with a voluntary action, don't consider it voluntary. If you can, unless you have a very good justification for not enacting it, if they're asking you to make voluntary changes, make those changes. That shows goodwill towards the audit and that you want to improve your study and have a well-run study. And then official action indicated, you get one of those, then you've got some serious issues. You need to take those very seriously and address those. Official action indicated is one step away from being shut down or disqualified. So take that very seriously. So I'm going to end my talk right there. I have another section that has some information, but you can go through that. It also has some case presentations at the end with some links, and you can go through that at your leisure and kind of educate yourself further on FDA audits. So I'll stop there and ask if I have any questions.
Thank you very much. And everybody, you had access to the slides within the chat. If you need them sent to you, I can also send them to you. Does anyone have any questions? Thinking that everyone is okay. I want to thank you very much for this informative presentation. And it was very, very well done. Very well done. I was engaged actually the entire time.
Oh, thank you.
Nice job.
I appreciate the attention. I know it's late on a Tuesday, and we all want to get to dinner and everything. So I appreciate the attention.
Thank you. And everyone, you are free to go unless you have questions. I will remain on until everyone has exited.
All right, and good luck in everything everybody does.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. And if I do see any questions and you are not on, I'll just forward them to you if that's okay.
Oh, that is fine. And actually, I usually put my contact information. I don't know why I didn't in this, but anybody can feel free to contact me. I'm in the Office of Research Compliance. I think everybody has my email and phone number. It's easy to find. It's on all the websites. Feel free to contact me with any questions that you might now want to ask in the group.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks.